Once the underwear was clean, Uloma dipped it into the basin again, then walked over to the pot of bunga sauce. She slowly stirred the sauce, adding the tainted water from the basin. Ojeki's eyes widened in shock, and she covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a gasp. She couldn't believe it. Everything Oma had told her was true. "This is unbelievable," Ojeki whispered, her voice trembling. Once upon a time in the village of Oha, Uloma was known for her irresistible bunga rice. The taste was rich, the aroma unforgettable. People couldn't resist her food. They lined up every morning, students, workers, market women, even travelers comes to buy her bunga rice. Her stall was always the busiest spot in the village. But what the villagers didn't know was that Uloma's success came from more than hard work or her mother's cooking lessons. Every night, when the village was quiet, she performed a dark ritual. She would take the water she used to wash her underwear and pour it into her cooking pots. This water, she believed, carried a mysterious power. She had been instructed to do this by their leader in the witchcraft coven, the day they assemble. Before now Uloma had been struggling to sell her rice for weeks, her stall empty day after day. One evening, she was called to a dark, secretive place by the coven leader. She stood in a circle with others, the air thick with mystery. The coven leader spoke in a low, commanding voice, offering her a way to ensure her success. "Use your underwear in the cooking process, and your stall will always be busy, filled with customers eager to buy," the leader instructed. At first, Uloma was hesitant, unsure of what to do, but the pressure to provide for herself, to make her stall a success, drove her to agree. She followed the leader's dark instructions, and the very next morning, her stall was crowded with people, all eager to buy her bunga rice. From that day on, she carried out the ritual every night, using her underwear in the food, making sure no one ever saw what she was doing. With each passing day, her stall grew busier, and the success she had longed for seemed to come effortlessly. Every midnight, she would sneak to the back of her house, collect the water from her washed underwear, and pour it into her pots. She whispered strange words she didn't fully understand, but they seemed to work. The villagers didn't notice anything unusual. All they knew was that they craved Uloma's food. But what they didn't realize was that their energy, their dreams, their very destinies were being drained. Slowly, some began to feel weaker. Students who once excelled in school started forgetting their lessons. Workers who were known for their strength suddenly became sluggish. Farmers who once harvested baskets of yam and cassava returned home with empty hands. This continued until one day when Oma, a widow who had sworn never to buy cooked food, noticed something strange. Oma had made this decision 2 years ago after a tragedy that changed her life forever. Her husband, Chaik, had died from food poisoning after eating at his favorite restaurant. At first, everyone thought it was a terrible accident. But months later, his uncle, Mr. Okaro, confessed on his deathbed that he had bribed the restaurant owners to poison Chaik's food. Mr. Okaro had wanted to steal Chaik's land and wealth. The confession shook the entire community. Since that day, Oma refused to buy cooked food. She cooked everything herself, no matter how tired she was. Her neighbors teased her sometimes. "Oma, you don't know what you're missing," they'd say. "Uloma's bunga rice is like a gift from the gods." But Oma only shook her head. "I've learned my lesson," she would reply. "Not all sweet food is safe food." That night, Oma made up her mind. She had to know the root of Uloma's secrets. No matter how dangerous it was, she couldn't sit back while her people were suffering. She needed answers. After the evening market had quieted down and the last of Uloma's customers left, Oma watched her closely from a corner of an uncompleted building not far from the food stall. Uloma was packing away her cooking pots and plates, carefully stacking them in the wheelbarrow. Oma waited, her heart racing. She had to stay hidden. She had to follow Uloma without being seen. Once Uloma finished packing up, she stood for a moment, looking around as if sensing something. But when her eyes didn't land on Oma, she started walking down the lonely road. Oma quietly stepped from the shadows and followed her. Uloma felt a strange chill run down her spine and looked over her shoulder, but saw nothing. The road was empty. Her eyes narrowed in suspicion. But she shook it off and continued her walk. Oma, being smart and careful, darted behind a plantain tree by the side of the road. She crouched low, holding her breath as Uloma passed by. Uloma stopped for a brief moment, as if she could feel someone watching her, but after a few tense seconds, she kept moving forward, unaware that Uloma was only a few steps behind. Uloma waited until Uloma was out of sight, then quickly and quietly followed her, keeping a safe distance. The path was quiet, and the moonlight cast long shadows across the road. After a while, they reached the house where Uloma lived. Uloma stayed hidden in the shadows, watching as Uloma stopped at the front door and looked around cautiously, just like she had done earlier. Uloma's heart pounded in her chest as she held her breath. After checking to make sure no one was around, Uloma entered the house. Uloma waited for a few moments, then slipped closer to the window. She was careful not to make a sound as she peered inside. What she saw shocked her to the core. Uloma took off her clothes and grabbed her underwear. She then walked over to a pot of already prepared bunga sauce. Uloma's eyes widened in disbelief. Uloma dipped her underwear into the sauce and began to mix it in, stirring it slowly, as if it were just a normal part of the cooking process. Uloma stood frozen by the window, her mouth open in shock. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. This was the dark secret she had been searching for. The food that had been draining the villagers' energy, the food that had been weakening her daughter and so many others, had been tainted by this unthinkable act. Her mind raced. She needed to act quickly. Uloma's plan was far darker than she had ever imagined. Uloma turned away from the window, her heart heavy with the burden of what she had just witnessed. She couldn't allow Uloma to continue this evil practice. The villagers had to be saved. She headed back to her house, determined to find a way to expose Uloma's secret and put an end to the suffering. She couldn't waste another moment. As Uloma lay in bed that night, she kept thinking of how to warn the others, how to stop Uloma for good. But she knew it wouldn't be easy. She needed to gather evidence and confront Uloma in front of the villagers. There was no other way. Tomorrow, Uloma promised herself she would find a way to end this nightmare and save the village. She wouldn't let anyone else fall victim to Uloma's cursed food. The next morning, Uloma couldn't shake the image of Uloma's dark secret from her mind. She knew she had to act fast, and she needed help. So, she decided to visit her friend Ojeki. Ojeki was a trusted friend, someone Uloma had known for many years, and they often shared everything with each other. Ojeki, too, had been concerned about Uloma. She had warned her children not to go near Uloma's food stall, but her children had refused to listen. They were drawn to the delicious aroma of the bunga rice, just like everyone else. Uloma knew that if Ojeki saw the truth for herself, she would understand. When Uloma arrived at Ojeki's house, she quickly pulled her friend aside. "Ojeki, I need to tell you something. Something you won't believe," Uloma said, her voice low and urgent. Ojeki looked at her with concern. "What is it, Uloma?" Uloma hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a whisper. "Uloma has been using her underwear to cook the bunga rice. She mixes it with the sauce, and that's why everyone is getting weaker." Ojeki gasped in disbelief. "What? How can that be?" "I saw it with my own eyes last night," Uloma said, her voice shaking with the memory. "She dips her underwear into the water, then mixes it with the sauce before cooking. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true." Ojeki looked horrified. "But why would she do that? What's her reason?" Uloma shook her head. "I don't know yet, but I have to stop her. We need to expose her before it's too late." Without wasting another moment, the two friends made a plan. They would visit Uloma's house and see for themselves. Ojeki had to witness it firsthand, so she would believe Uloma and help her stop the evil. Later that evening, they quietly made their way to Uloma's house. Uloma led the way, keeping an eye out for any signs of danger. When they arrived, they hid behind a large bush near the window. Uloma was inside, and the sound of her movements reached their ears. Uloma motioned for Ojeki to be still, then peered through the window. Inside, Uloma was preparing the meal. She moved to a basin, removed her underwear, and began washing it in the water. Uloma's stomach turned, but she stayed focused. Once the underwear was clean, Uloma dipped it into the basin again, then walked over to the pot of bunga sauce. She slowly stirred the sauce, adding the tainted water from the basin. Ojeki's eyes widened in shock, and she covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a gasp. She couldn't believe it. Everything Uloma had told her was true. "This is unbelievable," Ojeki whispered, her voice trembling. "She really does it." Oma nodded grimly. We can't let this continue. We have to expose her, or everyone in this village will suffer. Both women stood frozen, watching as Uloma continued her dark work. They knew that they had to act soon. Time was running out, and they couldn't let Uloma's evil plan unfold any longer. When Uloma finally finished, she covered the pot and took it to the back of her house. Oma and Ojeki waited until the coast was clear before slipping away into the shadows. They had seen enough. Now it was time to stop Uloma for good. The next day, Oma and Ojeki made their way to Uloma's food stall, determined to expose her once and for all. When they arrived, they were shocked to see a long line of customers already waiting for their turn. The smell of the delicious bunga rice filled the air, and the crowd seemed oblivious to what was really happening behind the scenes. Oma's anger boiled over. She could no longer stay quiet. She pushed her way to the front of the stall, her voice ringing out. Uloma's bunga rice is evil. You're all blind. You can't see what she's doing. The crowd fell silent, confused. People turned to look at Oma, some with puzzled expressions, others with suspicion. One man, holding a bowl of bunga rice that had just been served to him, stepped forward and asked, What do you mean, woman? Are you saying we shouldn't eat it? I saw her with my own eyes. Oma shouted back, her voice trembling with emotion. She's using her underwear to cook the rice and mixing it with a dark spell. That's why you're all growing weaker and doing nothing with your lives. Ojeki, who had been standing by Oma's side the entire time, nodded her head firmly. Yes, we both saw her, just like Oma is saying. I saw her with my own eyes, too. Ojeki added, confirming everything Oma had said. The villagers turned to Ojeki, surprised that someone else was backing Oma's claim. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some of the people who had already bought food dropped their bowls, stunned by the accusation. Others shouted at Oma, calling her crazy or accusing her of trying to ruin the business. But Oma's words, now confirmed by Ojeki, had already planted seeds of doubt in their minds. Before anyone could react further, Uloma, who had been standing by the stall watching the scene unfold, tried to slip away into the crowd. But it was too late. The people who had been eating her food now grabbed her, holding her tight. They were furious and scared, and they could feel something was terribly wrong. Uloma struggled to break free, but the crowd was stronger. She was quickly tied up by the villagers, her arms and legs bound, as the truth of her dark deeds began to sink in. Oma stood over her, her heart pounding. She was terrified but resolute. Uloma, you can't run anymore, Oma said. The spell you cast on us, it's broken now. Uloma's eyes widened with fear. She knew that her secret had been exposed, and there was no way out. Her evil plans were no longer hidden in the shadows. She looked around at the angry faces, realizing the villagers were no longer under her spell. With her head hung low, Uloma began to confess. I used the glory of those who ate my food in exchange for higher positions in my kingdom, in the world of darkness. I was promised power, riches, everything I could ever want, but only if I kept feeding you all, draining your energy. Oma and Ojeki listened in shock as Uloma continued. Anyone who ate my food became weaker over time. They couldn't do anything serious, couldn't achieve their dreams. They were just lazy, drifting through life, while I used their power for my own gain. The crowd was silent now, the weight of Uloma's confession hanging in the air. No one could believe what they were hearing, but they knew it was the truth. The spell had been broken, and the villagers were free. The news of Uloma's evil deeds quickly spread through the village, and it didn't take long before it reached the king. The king, who had heard rumors of strange happenings in the village, immediately ordered Uloma to be brought before him. When Uloma was brought before the king, she begged for mercy, but the king showed no compassion. Her actions had harmed the entire village, and her dark magic had caused suffering to many innocent people. The king sternly ordered Uloma to undo the spell she had cast on those who had eaten her food. A town crier was sent out to announce the king's decree, calling for everyone who had consumed Uloma's food to come to the palace for cleansing. After Uloma performed the cleansing, undoing the dark spell she had cast on the villagers, the king, with a stern look, ordered that she be banished from the village. He declared that she would never again be allowed to set foot in the village, and her evil deeds would no longer have a place in their community. Uloma was escorted out, never to return. The villagers cheered as Uloma was escorted out of the village, her power broken. Oma and Ojeki stood together, relieved that the nightmare was finally over. The village was free from Uloma's evil, and life slowly returned to normal. People began to feel their strength returning, and they started pursuing their dreams once again. The moral lesson from this story is that greed and the desire for power at the expense of others will always lead to destruction. Uloma's actions caused harm to the people around her, but in the end, her evil deeds were exposed, and she faced the consequences. The story teaches us that truth will always come to light, and those who take advantage of others for personal gain will ultimately face justice. Additionally, it reminds us to be cautious of what we consume, both physically and metaphorically, as it can impact our well-being. This is the end of my story. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching African Folktale Story with Proper Folktale Chronicles. Kindly click on the subscribe button, share, like, and comment. See you in my next video.